I decided to get a book on Kindle. I just, I'm just reading a lot. But anyway, I wanted to get a book on Kindle, and this book is Project Bluebeam, The Faith Algorithm, How Technology, Trauma, and hold on, oh my goodness, how a technology, trauma, and media are reprogramming belief. And this is from Reese Korr, and she basically, what do you want to call it? Added to, I guess, used Serge Manas' uh, book and research as a springboard. I guess you could kind of say that, if that makes sense. This is not like a long book or anything like that, but I probably will not be able to read it all tonight. Quite honestly, my tooth has really not tooth. I don't have any teeth. Well, I do have teeth, but where it's hurting, there's no tooth there. But anyway, I'm hurting again, kind of bad, and I just put Orajel in my mouth because guys, here it is. I'm thinking, I'm praying, God help me. I've got the mild painkillers and stuff, which just, sometimes they're a joke, but it's okay. And then I thought maybe I'll have a glass of wine, and it's like, no, I'm not going to do that. It's just, I'm hurting. I'll be honest with you, I'm hurting, but I want to read this. I think this is going to be very enlightening, I guess is the word. So here we go. Chapter 1, The Faith Algorithm. We used to look to the sky for answers. Now we look to a screen. Somewhere along the way, belief stopped being sacred. It became programmable. We were warned to watch for false signs, a global deception, a manufactured Messiah projected from the heavens. But what if that deception doesn't need lasers or a godlike figure in the clouds? What if Project Bluebeam, once dismissed as a paranoid fantasy, was never meant to happen in one dramatic moment? What if it was designed to unfold slowly, quietly, invisibly? What if it's already happening, not through spectacle, but through systems? The algorithm curates your news. It chooses what you see, what you believe, what you fear. Your faith, whether religious, political, scientific, or cultural, is no longer built through experience. It's engineered, reinforced by repetition, triggered by trauma, delivered through the glow of devices we've come to worship like relics. And this is where the theory of Project Bluebeam becomes more than a conspiracy. Because even if the original warning about holograms, NASA, and staged spiritual events never arrives exactly as predicted, the machinery behind it is already in motion, not as a single event, as an environment. The blueprint for belief control. In the early 1990s, Canadian journalist Serge Manas claimed he had uncovered a global plan to fake the second coming of Christ. According to him, space-based technology would project deity-like images into the sky, tailored to each cultural's belief system, while telepathic frequencies would make people hear divine messages in their minds. This staged spiritual event would unite the world under a single false religion, backed by a one world government, the so-called New World Order. It sounded outlandish, but the core of it wasn't about holograms. It was about faith manipulation at scale and using that engineered belief to consolidate global control. If we strip away the theatrical parts, the floating messiahs, the booming celestial voices, what's left is something much more dangerous. A plan to hijack human perception, reprogram spiritual instinct, and manufacture consent through fear. wonder, and misinformation. Sound familiar? Faith in crisis. Across the globe, or, plane, traditional belief systems are fracturing. Churches are emptying. Extremism is rising. A growing number of people now identify with vague concepts like the universe, consciousness, or energy, while others cling to dogma that becomes more political, pol- policy, politicized by the day, politicized by the day. Spiritual confusion has become a kind of cultural default. At the same time, our belief in institutions, science, media, government is deteriorating. Trust is no longer earned, it's purchased, algorithmically reinforced or imposed. Into this vacuum steps something else, a new kind of belief, one that is not organic or divine, but curated and optimized. A belief that emerges not from revelation, but from design. Into this vacuum steps something else, a new kind of belief, one that is not organic. I've said that. I'm so sorry, guys, but here's my tooth. Forgive me. Is not organic or divine, but curated and optimized. A belief that emerges not from revelation, but from design. We don't worship gods anymore. We worship trends, movements, screens, figures we don't know, but feel like we do. And that is exactly the kind of vulnerability Project Bluebeam was meant to exploit. Project Bluebeam was never about the sky, it was about the mind. What if the projection isn't a light show in the clouds, but a data stream in your feed? What if the voice from above has been replaced by the voice in your pocket? What if Bluebeam was never delayed because it didn't need to be staged in the way we thought? In the chapters ahead, we'll explore the original theory in full, who Serge Monast was, what he claimed, and why it got him silenced. But we'll also go deeper than that. We'll examine the technologies that make his warnings plausible today. AI generated messiahs, trauma based psychological programming, media worship, and the algorithmic conditioning of entire populations. Be- because the greatest deception may not be the one that stuns us, it may be the one that feels normal. And if belief is now programmable, then the real question is, what will we see in the sky? It's what part of our soul have we already handed over without even realizing it? Chapter 2, The Origin. Blue beam as a map for mass control. Conspiracy theories usually age one of two ways. They fade into irrelevance or they get harder to ignore. Project Bluebeam is in the second category. When Canadian journalist Serge Monast first introduced the theory in the early 1990s, it sounded outrageous even to the most seasoned skeptics. He claimed that NASA, in coordination with the United Nations, was planning to use satellites, mind control technology, and holographic projections to stage a global spiritual event. The goal? To unite the world under a false messiah and create a single authoritarian world government. Most dismissed it as wild speculation, but in the decades since, the components of his warning have become disturbingly recognizable. The technology Manas described, voice to skull communication, atmospheric holography, psychological warfare, social destabilization, artificial intelligence, and mass surveillance, no longer belongs to science fiction. These systems exist, they are operational, and more importantly, they're being refined with precision and purpose. Project Bluebeam isn't just about faking a religious event, it's about identifying how belief itself can be turned into a system of control. In this way, it becomes less a conspiracy and more a playbook, a psychological operation blueprint that's already influencing politics, religion, media, and culture today. Not a single event, a strategic process. One of the common misunderstandings about Project Bluebeam is that it's supposed to be a one time spectacle, the lights in the sky, the booming divine voice, the moment humanity kneels in unicism. But what if Monostat wasn't describing a single performance, but a mythology? Think of it like this. Phase 1: undermine traditional religious beliefs through scientific discoveries and cultural erosion. Phase 2: introduce a new synthetic belief system delivered through media, symbols, and charismatic messengers. Phase 3: reinforce the illusion with technology, both visual and neurological. Phase 4: use the manufactured crisis to justify new laws, new structures, and total compliance. That sounds less like a space opera and more like the past 3 decades of geopolitical, spiritual, and cultural evolution. We'll explore each of these 4 phases in detail in the next chapters, not just as theory, but in the context of what we're already seeing in today's world. In fact, when viewed through that lens, Bluebeam becomes less prophecy and more of a mirror held up in our current reality. Control the belief, control the world. Monas delivered, not delivered, forgive me, Monas believed that humanity could be controlled not through brute force, but through belief manipulation. If you can replace what people trust, their gods, small g, because it has S, their stories, their inner compass, you don't need chains, you need influence. Today, that influence doesn't come from the sky. It comes from algorithms, celebrity prophets, influencers, curated crises, and echo chambers that manufacture outrage and unity on demand. What Monas may not have foreseen was how willingly people would submit to these systems, that we would not need to be tricked by gods. We would willingly give ourselves over to manufactured meaning just to feel like we still have one. A conspiracy built on existing systems. Skeptics ask, why would NASA or the UN participate in something so outrageous? The answer lies not in secret meetings or dark rituals, but in systems already in place. Global satellite infrastructure that can monitor, influence, or project across the planet. Behavioral science and military psychological ops, well documented in Cold War programs like MK Ultra and DARPA's research into cognitive warfare. Mass surveillance and data harvesting by intelligent agencies and corporations alike. Religious disillusionment, social fragmentation, and a hunger for global solutions. Manas may have woven his theory from incomplete information, but his conclusions now read like a foreshadowing of exactly what the 21st century has delivered. Not just control of what people do, but control of what people believe to be true. The blueprint never needed to be believed, it just needed to work. Project Bluebeam was easy to dismiss in 1994, but now it's no longer but now it's no longer about whether you believe in Monas' version of events. It's about recognizing the themes he warned about. Perception is programmable. Belief can be simulated. Spirituality can be manufactured. Control doesn't have to look like tyranny, it can look like salvation. And in that sense, Bluebeam isn't a distant threat, it's a lens, a way to understand what's already happening. In the next chapter, we'll look directly at Serge Monast himself, the man behind the message, the documents he left behind, and the suspicious silence that followed his death. Chapter 3, Serge Monast, the journalist who warned the world. Before the theory, before the global whispers, before the digital rabbit holes, there was just a man, Serge Monast, a Canadian investigative journalist, a devout Christian, a political writer who, in the early 1990s, stepped into a world of shadows and never came back out. He wasn't a YouTuber chasing clicks or a podcast host playing with fringe ideas for entertainment. He was what's that word? Methodological? Methodical. Thank you. Thank you. He was methodical, intentional, and when he began to publish his work on Project Bluebeam, it wasn't just a warning, it was a message to future generations. They will not control you unless you let them. Then one day, he was gone. A voice from Quebec. Born in 1945 in Quebec, Canada, Serge Monast lived through a turbulent period of political transformation and growing globalism. A poet, essayist, and former journalist for conservative publications, he had a long-standing suspicion of centralized power and supranational influence. Throughout the 1980s and early 90s, Monast focused his writing on emerging themes like the New World Order, surveillance systems, education control, and religious manipulation. He wasn't alone in these interests, but he was unusually detailed, connecting dots others had not even seen yet. Then came the theory that would define his legacy, Project Bluebeam. Monast began publishing the materials in French that outlined what he believed was a top secret plan by NASA and the United Nations to initiate a staged second coming, an artificial, global, spiritual event powered by satellite technology, psychological warfare, and mass trauma conditioning. According to Monast, this event would be used to eliminate traditional religions, introduce a new one world faith, trigger a political unification under global governance, and ultimately initiate a fully controlled society based not on freedom, but on perception. To him, it wasn't a theory, it was already being developed. The work that couldn't be erased. Monast published two primary works that still circulate in underground forms and translated PDFs today. Project Bluebeam, NASA, his core explanation of the four-phase plan, the United Nations and the New World Order, a broader critique of global control systems. In these texts, Monast went far beyond vague speculation. He offered names, dates, programs. He cited patents, space-based tech developments, psychological experiments, and education system reforms that he claimed were all connected to the same blueprint. He warned that the rise of global crisis would be the pretext for a manufactured solution, that a spiritual vacuum was being created intentionally so that it could later be filled by something artificial, but more seductive than anything that came before. He wasn't asking his readers to panic. He was asking them to wake up. The sudden silencing. In 1995, things took a dark turn. The Canadian government removed Monast's two children from his home, citing illegal homeschooling. According to Monast, this was not about education. It was about intimidation. He wrote that he had been harassed, surveilled, and warned to stop publishing. Then on December 5th, 1996, Monast died of a heart attack in his home. He was 51 years old. He had no prior history of heart disease and had just spent the night in police custody days earlier. No formal autopsy was publicly released. His death came shortly after he warned in interviews that he was being targeted and would likely be eliminated if he continued to speak out. Mainstream media said nothing. His books were quietly removed from the shelves, and outside of the fringe conspiracy circles, his name vanished. But his words did not. Was he right or just early? To this day, the legacy of Serge Monast is split in two. To skeptics, he was a well read but over imaginative man who misunderstood military tech and built a narrative out of shadows. To believers, he was a whistleblower, a prophet, a man who died telling the truth before the world was ready to hear it. The timing of his death, the disappearance of his materials, and the trajectory of the world in the years that followed only deepened the mythos around him. Some believe he was assassinated. Others suggest he was a victim of the very system he warned about, one that doesn't just remove threats physically, but erases them through digital censorship, reputation collapse, and silence. And yet his words remain, not on bookstore shelves, but on hard drives, message boards, and in the minds of a growing number of people who look around at the current world and see, piece by piece, his vision becoming reality. The man who saw it coming. Serge Monast may not have had all the facts, but he had the pattern. He saw the future of belief under control, of faith under simulation, of a world that would eventually trade truth for safety and never question who made the trade. What he described was impossible in 1994. It is technically feasible today. In the next chapter, we'll examine the four-phase structure of Project Bluebeam, not just as Mondstadt laid it out, but through the lens of the present, a time when the machinery to make it real already surrounds us. Chapter 4, Breaking Down Bluebeam, the four phases of belief reprogramming. Serge Mondstadt's theory wasn't vague, it was surgical. He didn't just warn about a fake messiah or a mysterious plan. He laid out a step-by-step operation, a method to transform the spiritual, psychological, and political reality of the entire world. He called it Project Bluebeam, and he claimed it would unfold in four distinct phases, not just to deceive people temporarily, but to permanently rewrite what humanity believes, fears, and follows. In this chapter, we'll explore each phase exactly as Monast described, and then compare those phases to what we're already seeing unfold today. Because if Bluebeam isn't a future plan, it might already be in progress. Phase 1, the breakdown of all archaeological knowledge. Step 1 concerns the breakdown of all archaeological knowledge. This will be accomplished by faking new discoveries that challenge existing religious and spiritual beliefs. Serge Monast. The first step in the Bluebeam plan is psychological destabilization. Specifically, it targets religion by rewriting the historical foundation it's built upon. According to Monast, this phase involves the fabrication of archaeological discoveries. New finds would appear in remote places, allegedly proving that long accepted religious figures were myths, the sacred texts were mistranslations, or that extraterrestrial beings played a central role in ancient spiritual systems. Sound familiar? From the ancient aliens movement to selective media coverage of archaeological revelations, we've seen a surge in narratives suggesting that Jesus may not have existed as described. Religious myths were inspired by advanced beings or misunderstood technology. Global myths share a hidden common source that undermines the uniqueness of any one tradition. The goal, Monast said, I keep saying his name wrong. Monast said, is not just to create doubt, but to create confusion, division, and crisis of faith. A population that doesn't trust its own beliefs becomes spiritually vulnerable. And that's the point. Phase two, the massive space show. This is the infamous sky event most associated with Bluebeam. In phase two, giant holographic images of religious figures appear in the sky, each tailored to the dominant faiths of different religions or regions. These projections would speak to the people in their own language, delivering a unified message that the old religions were all misunderstandings of a single universal truth. Eventually, all these figures would merge into one image, representing the true God, small g, a synthetic Messiah who calls for peace, unity, and obedience to the new world faith. In 1994, this sounded insane. Today, the technology exists. 3D volumetric projection can already create images in the sky using plasma, drones, and laser. Voice to skull, V2K, tech has been demonstrated to beam audio into a person's head without any external speaker. AI systems are capable of generating real time translations, ouch, customized emotional messaging, and responsive avatars with deep psychological profiling. And perhaps most importantly, people have been primed. We've seen virtual resurrections at concerts. We've watched spiritual symbolism flood pop culture. We've become comfortable with celebrity level spiritual influencers who blend sacred language with social media charisma. When the sky speaks, especially with a familiar face, who will question it? Phase three, telepathic electronic two-way communication. Monas claimed that once belief systems had been destabilized and people were emotionally primed by the false messiah, the next phase would begin: thought control. Using electromagnetic frequency (EMF) technology, Project Bluebeam would simulate a spiritual experience in every person's mind. Not just a voice, a feeling, a revelation, a message that seems to come from within. The goal of this phase is to implant the illusion of divine contact. Technologies that align with this claim now exist and are in development for both military and medical use. Transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, can alter mood and perception. Non-invasive brain-computer interfaces, BCIs, are being developed for communication with machines, but can just as easily transmit signals to the brain. Some patents linked to U.S. defense contractors have explored synthetic telepathy and remote neural monitoring. Under the right conditions, enough fear, enough awe, enough manipulation, people could be made to feel they are receiving personal divine guidance. And if that guidance is consistent across billions of people, who would dare resist? Phase 4, supernatural manifestations and global crisis. The final phase of Bluebeam is where the illusion gives way to control through fear. Manas described this as a period of staged supernatural activity and global trauma. Simulated alien invasions, engineered demonic possessions or poltergeist attacks, a massive coordinated global disaster that appears spiritual or otherworldly. The purpose? To completely collapse resistance, to overwhelm the mind, to make people beg for help, and willingly accept the so-called New World Order offered as the solution. This isn't just military strategy. It's psychological warfare on a spiritual level. It's about replacing not just belief, but agency. It creates the illusion of surrendering to divine force when in fact people are surrendering to a system. From blueprint to reality. The full four-phase structure of Project Bluebeam is horrifying, not because it's fictional, but because every component now has a real-world counterpart. Even if the original idea sounds too theatrical or extreme, the broader pattern is clearer. Destabilize belief, insert synthetic meaning, control emotion and perception, use fear to seal the deal. This is not the future, it's the present. You don't need a satellite to control belief. You just need media, trauma, and emotional void to fill. In the next chapters, we'll go deeper into how each of these phases is already manifesting in culture, tech, politics, and even faith itself. Because Project Bluebeam may not be coming, it may have already arrived. Chapter 5, Prophets of the Cloud, the Rise of AI Spirituality. There was a time when spiritual authority came from ancient texts, mystics and temples, or century-old traditions passed down through firelight and faith. Now it comes from apps, from algorithms, from curated divine messages written by machines. If phase 2 of Project Bluebeam is about representing a new global faith, then what we're seeing today might be the soft launch. The new belief system isn't descending from the sky, it's coming from the cloud. The prophets of the future don't wear robes, they wear codes. Digital faith in a post-religious world. Across much of the Western world, traditional religion is in steep decline. Churches sit empty, temples grow quiet. Millennials and Generation Z increasingly identify as spiritual but not religious, seeking purpose outside of organized faith. But that doesn't mean belief has died. It's simply moved, and it was found a new home in technology. Today, people turn to AI generated affirmations to start their day, mediation apps that guide them to inner peace with algorithmic wisdom, digital tarot readers, and astrology bots that offer daily direction, virtual pastors, new age influencers, and TikTok psychics with millions of followers. These aren't jokes, they are indicators. The hunger for meaning hasn't disappeared. It's just being filled with machine mediated spirituality that feels personal, soothing, and frictionless. Exactly the kind of belief system Monas warned would be introduced once the old ones had been destabilized. The AI God has arrived. In 2023, researchers developed AI chatbots that could mimic spiritual figures. Some were trained on religious texts, others combined psychological models, mindfulness scripts, and New Age language to offer tailored divine guidance. One bot, trained to act as an all knowing, non denominational God, responded to personal confessions, gave emotional counsel, and even issued ethical judgments, all in real time. This isn't science fiction. We now have AI avatars that simulate conversations with Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, or even deceased loved ones. Analyze your mood through facial recognition and offer spiritual reassurance. Learn your belief system and reinforce it with comforting, customized messages. In the right hands, this might be therapeutic. In the wrong hands, it becomes faith reprogramming, wrapped in convenience. Synthetic salvation at scale. The advantage of a machine based belief system is obvious. It scales. Traditional religions rely on human leaders, sacred spaces, and often painful introspection. AI spirituality requires none of that. It's always available, always agreeable, and always evolving to fit what the user responds to best. Now imagine that system just isn't on your phone, but is broadcast to every screen, embedded into social media feeds, and endorsed by political and cultural leaders under the banner of peace or mental wellness. It would feel like salvation, even though it's engineered belief written not by prophets but by programmers. This is what makes Project Bluebeam feel less like a far off theory and more like a logical progression of where we already are. The global religion doesn't have to be forced, it can be sold, framed as inclusive, adaptive, spiritual, without the dogma, and people will flock to it. What we're being conditioned to accept. The idea of a synthetic messiah once sounded absurd, but now it's easy to imagine. A globally live streamed holographic figure powered by AI, capable of speaking every language and offering comfort during global crisis. A universal digital prophet who merges all faiths and philosophies into one coherent system, created by machine learning models trained on scripture, psychology, and behavioral data. A God who seems to know you, speak to you, and evolve with you because it is programmed to do exactly that. And because it doesn't come from one religion or government, it won't feel authoritarian. It'll feel democratic, global, safe. But engineered faith is still engineered control. When belief becomes synthetic, the soul becomes programmable. The cloud is the new pulpit. Pulpit. Yeah, that's what's called pulpit. The world monast warned about may not arrive with flashing lights and heavenly voices booming from above. It may arrive quietly, seamlessly, wrapped in sleek UX design and delivered through your most trusted digital companions. In fact, it may already be here. The prophets of the cloud don't demand worship. They just offer help, reassurance, connection, and answers. All you have to do is listen. All you have to do is believe. In the next chapter, we'll explore how media itself has become the new priesthood, shaping public consensus, crafting emotional truth, and blurring the line between spirituality and narrative. Because if AI is the new prophet, media is already the church. Chapter 6, Manufactured Faith, How Media Becomes a New Priesthood. When religions ruled civilizations, priests stood at the gates of knowledge. They interpreted sacred texts, spoke on behalf of the divine, and shaped how the public understood right and wrong, truth and heresy. That role hasn't disappeared. It's just been digitized. In today's world, media has replaced the priesthood. The screen is the pulpit. The anchor is the preacher. The algorithm is the theologian. And belief, once cultivated in silence and reflection, is now curated in headlines, hashtags, and emotionally engineered narratives. If Project Bluebeam is about shaping global belief, the media is the delivery system. It doesn't need a hologram in the sky. It already has your undivided attention. The new gatekeepers of belief. In every age, there's a class of people tasked with shaping what others believe. In ancient times, they were priests, scribes, and mystics. Today, they're journalists, influencers, platform moderators, and content curators. They determine what you see, what you don't, what's true, what's dangerous, what you should feel about all of it. The average person doesn't research, they absorb. Belief today is formed through repetition, emotional reinforcement, and social proof. If enough people feel the same way, it becomes truth. That's not education. That's indoctrination by design. Narrative as scripture. News is no longer information. It's scripture for the secular mind. It tells people what's sacred: science, democracy, equality. It defines sin, misinformation, extremism, hate speech. It names heretics and saints. It offers rituals, likes, shares, hashtags of repentance or support. And like old religious systems, media narratives create binary moral structures. You're either with the cause or against it. You're either enlightened or regressive. You either believe what's trending or you're cast out as a threat to progress. This is not accidental. This is psychological warfare repackaged as cultural consensus. And the most unfortunate part about it, it's astonishingly effective. Emotional programming and algorithmic priesthood. Algorithms, particularly on social platforms, don't just serve you content, they shape your worldview. They reward outrage, they suppress nuance, they feed you more of what you already agree with, creating the illusion that your beliefs are universal and moral, while opposing views are dangerous or insane. This isn't just tribalism, it's algorithmic theology. The machine becomes your confirmation bias on steroids. It tells you who the enemy is, what to fear, what redemption looks like, what the next emotional crisis is, and how you should respond. And you follow. Not because you're weak, but because the system is built to feel natural, easy, emotional, inescapable. From fact to faith, the collapse of objective reality. The more people become immersed in curated narratives, the more they begin to believe emotionally rather than rationally. And this is where the real danger begins. When truth becomes a feeling, it can be manufactured at will. All it takes is the right footage, the right voice, the right sequence of events, and people will believe in anything. This is how Project Bluebeam could succeed without ever turning on a single hologram. You don't need Jesus in the sky if you can create him in the feed. You don't need alien ships over cities if you convince people the world is ending, and then offer them salvation in the form of a new belief system, delivered by the voices they already trust: media, culture, celebrities, scientists, influencers. The conversion doesn't happen in a cathedral, it happens in the scroll. Mm-mm-mm. Manufactured consensus equals manufactured faith. In this world, the idea of a top down synthetic religion doesn't feel dystopian. It feels convenient. A belief system that makes you feel included, tells you you're on the right side of history, gives you a moral structure without the weight of ancient text or inconvenient rules, has no God but plenty of gods: justice, health, equality, identity, science, safety, progress. These aren't bad values, but when weaponized by narrative and reinforced by emotion, they become something else: a new religion without a soul, but with all the power of the old ones. And that power is no longer just in governments or temples. It's in your phone, your news feed, your favorite show. Belief is being shaped constantly, and most people don't even realize it. Media as missionary for the new faith. If Project Bluebeam was meant to replace the global religion with a unifying artificial belief system, then media is already doing that. It speaks in a single voice. It transcends national borders. It has its own martyrs, villains, and miracles. And most importantly, it has the power to make billions believe the same thing at the same time. That's not just influence, that's conversion. In the next chapter, we'll explore the psychological mechanics behind this transformation, how trauma, chaos, and fear are used to break belief and install something new in its place. Because belief isn't just shaped by words, it's shaped by wounds. Chapter 7: Trauma, Fear, and the Reprogramming of Reality. Have you ever heard the quote by John Adams? Facts are stubborn things, but our minds are even more stubborn. It's a warning. one that most modern systems of influence understand all too well. If you want to change what people believe, you don't start with facts, you start with trauma. Fear is the most powerful tool in behavioral control. It disrupts rational thought, it triggers compliance, it rewires the brain, and it creates an opening, a psychological fracture where new belief can be inserted, usually disguised as safety. Project Bluebeam isn't just about a grand illusion in the sky. It's about breaking the collective mind, creating a psychological shockwave so intense people abandon their existing beliefs in favor of whatever message promises relief. The kind of mass psychological reprogramming doesn't happen overnight. It happens one crisis at a time. The psychology of collapse. Here's what every intelligent agency and military psychological operations unit understands. Fear opens the mind. Trauma makes it malleable. Repetition locks it in. When people experiment, no, I'm sorry, they don't experiment. When people experience sustained fear, whether personal or global, they enter a state of cognitive instability. In that state, they seek structure, answers, and a sense of control. This is why cults, radical movements, and mass conversions always spike in the aftermath of disaster. Now apply that on a global scale. Terrorism, war, economic collapse, plagues, unprecedented climate catastrophes, civil unrest, technological anxiety. Each of these events chips away at trust, identity, and spiritual certainty. They don't just make people afraid, they make people question their place in the universe, their beliefs, their God. And once the foundation is cracked, the programming begins. Shock and awe, the 21st century template. Let's look at the rhythm of the past 2 decades. 9/11 shattered America's sense of safety and launched a permanent global war on terror. The 2008 financial crash dissolved faith in the economic system. Mass shootings became normalized. Safety in public space evaporated. COVID 19 introduced biological fear on a global scale, along with unprecedented restrictions, digital tracking, and mass behavior conditioning. The rise of AI has introduced um, existential fear about our very identity and perhaps as humans. Each event wasn't just traumatic, it came with a new belief system. Accept surveillance to feel free. Accept digital dependency to survive. Accept new cultural rules to stay included. Accept that facts change based on context and evolving science. Accept the next system as progress, even if it feels wrong. This is exactly the kind of multi phase trauma conditioning Monas described in Bluebeam. Not just a single staged event, but a cascading series of psychological shocks that wear down resistance and prepare the mind for replacement beliefs. The role of controlled crisis. Monas warned that stage crisis, supernatural manifestations, in his words, would be used to trigger this shift. But in a world constantly under siege from real or perceived threats, does the manipulation even need to be that theatrical anymore? Maybe the spectacle isn't necessary when every major event is politicized. Every emotion is broadcast and echoed in real time. Every tragedy becomes a narrative. Every fear becomes a subscription to a new worldview. Whether or not crises are manufactured, their emotional effects are always weaponized. And with modern technology, that weaponization is real, scalable, and increasingly personalized. Spiritual trauma as a gateway to new faith. This is where the spiritual dimension becomes impossible to ignore. People don't just feel unsafe, they feel unmoored, spiritually adrift. They've lost trust in religion, in tradition, in morality. And as trauma intensifies, they seek out whatever fills the void, often something faster, easier, digital. AI that listens without judgment, truths that evolve daily depending on what feels right, leaders who speak like therapists but act like marketers, universal spirituality that requires no sacrifice, no doctrine, no God, just compliance. This isn't religion, it's engineered belief. And trauma is the delivery system. Pain, programming, peace. The psychological arc is simple. 1. Pain. Create or amplify a crisis that destabilizes the mind. 2. Programming. Offer a narrative that explains the pain and identifies the solution. 3. Peace. Provide a new identity or belief that resolves the tension, but only if the subject accepts the new system. That's how minds are reprogrammed. That's how faith is rewritten. And if enough people experience this at the same time through media, AI, and coordinated emotional messaging, then you've engineered not just a new belief system, you've engineered a new human consensus. In the next chapter, we'll look at the machinery that makes this scale of illusion possible, not just in minds, but in the world around us. Holograms, frequencies, satellites, and digital avatars. Because even if the sky has an open jet, the hardware is already online. Chapter 8: Illusion, Technology, Holograms, Voice to Skull, and Deep Fakes. For most people, Project Bluebeam sounds impossible because of one simple question: how? How could anyone project a God into the sky? How could a voice speak directly into the human mind? How could something fake feel so deeply real? In 1994, those were fair questions, but today the answers are no longer theoretical. The technology to simulate miracles and implant belief is not just real, it's operational. You don't need magic to create a messiah. You just need the right tools. Sky is a screen, large scale holography. The most iconic part of the blue beam theory is the so called space show, the moment when gods appear in the sky, unique to each region, speaking to humanity in a way that feels divine. In the 1990s, that sounded like pure science fiction. Today, it sounds like a product launch. Here's what's already happening. Japan and China have demonstrated aerial holograms using plasma lasers to project 3D images midair. Drone swarms are now used in entertainment to create moving, morphing shapes and symbols in the sky, controllable in real time. Volumetric projection technology is advancing rapidly, allowing visual illusions to appear without a screen or visible source. In 2012, a holographic Tupac performed at Coachella. In 2024, AI generated resurrected avatars of historical figures are now appearing in classrooms, museums, and virtual events. So, what happens when that technology is scaled globally and pointed at the sky? And more importantly, will people even question it? Hearing voices, voice to skull, and microwave auditory tech. One of Monad's most controversial claims was that governments had developed technology to beam voices directly into people's heads, a spiritual whisper that could be mistaken for the voice of God. As outrageous as it sounds, the U.S. military has confirmed versions of this tech exist. It's called the microwave auditory effect. Using focused microwave pulses, a sound can be transmitted directly into the skull without any external audio device. The target hears it as if it came from within their own mind. Some patents and military white papers refer to this as silent sound or synthetic telepathy. It has been explored for crowd control, psychological operations, psyops, battlefield disorientation, covert communication. In the context of Blue Beam, this isn't just communication, it's divine impersonation. Imagine standing under a glowing figure in the sky and then hearing that figure speak to you in your own language, using words you feel in your chest rather than hear with your ears. How many people would believe it's God? How many would question the source? Reanimation of the saints, deep fakes, and AI avatars. Another element of Project Bluebeam is the presentation of spiritual figures, customized by culture and geography. In today's world, that wouldn't require real actors or even live projection. It would only require AI avatars and deep fakes. Right now, it's possible to create a photorealistic video of any person, alive or dead, saying whatever script you want. Clone their voice with AI voice synthesis, including emotional tone and inflection. Combine these tools with live generative AI, making the avatar capable of real life conversation with thousands, even millions of people at once. This means a single AI generated Messiah could appear in video, on your device, or even in holographic form. Speak to every person individually, in their language, in their dialect, with emotional content tailored to their personality profile. Offer guidance, salvation, and authority, all controlled by the system behind the curtain. A God that learns from you, adapts to you, and never stops watching. ELF, EMF, and frequency control. Project Bluebeam also warns of the use of electromagnetic frequencies to alter human perception and behavior. Again, the idea seems far fetched until you look at the research. Extremely low frequency, ELF, waves have been studied for decades for their ability to affect mood, sleep, aggression, and even belief. HARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program in Alaska, has long been the subject of speculation about weather manipulation and mind influence. While much of that is framed as conspiracy lore, the facility's stated purpose is atmospheric experimentation using electromagnetic waves, and that alone is enough to raise eyebrows. New experiments in neuromodulation and non invasive brain stimulation suggest that electromagnetic energy can be used to trigger feelings of awe, fear, anxiety, or calm without a person ever knowing why. If belief is a neurological state, then it's theoretically triggerable. Triggerable. With the right signal, the right tone, the right sequence, belief becomes just another switch to flip. The tech isn't coming, it is here. Everything man has described, from sky based illusions to internal spiritual messaging, exists in some form today. Military patents, private sector tech, experimental cognitive research, commercial entertainment systems, mass media platforms already using a psychological targeting. The only thing missing is synchronization. Put it all together with the right trauma, the right media messaging, the right emotional climate, and you have a system capable of delivering an illusion so powerful most people would never question it. Because the illusion doesn't just hit the eyes or the ears, it hits the soul. What would you believe if you saw it? That's the final question Bluebeam asked. Not could this happen, but what would you respond if it did? How would you respond? I mean, if it did. You wake up, you look at the sky, and something's divine is there, shimmering, speaking, radiating peace and authority. Would you believe? And if you didn't, would you dare say it out loud? In the next chapter, we'll turn our attention to the systems that manage and unify this influence, the global organizations and networks that don't need to conspire, they just need to cooperate. Because for a project like Bluebeam to work, it doesn't need secrecy, it just needs infrastructure. Chapter 9, Global Infrastructure. And I'm sorry, Global Infrastructure, NASA, the UN, and Quiet Architects. For Project Bluebeam to function, it doesn't require some shadowy global cabal operating from a smoke filled room. It only requires existing institutions quietly doing what they've always done, developing technology, managing global narratives, and operating above public accountability. When Serge Monash first introduced the theory, he didn't just talk about tech. He named names, two specifically, NASA and the United Nations. At the time, those names raised eyebrows. Why would a space agency and a peacekeeping body be involved in staging a spiritual deception? But once you examine their global reach, their missions, and their deep ties to military and psychological research networks, the question flips. Who else could pull it off? NASA, not just rockets and rovers. To the public, NASA is an image of innovation, exploration, and patriotic science. Moon landings, space shuttles, Mars rovers. But behind the scenes, NASA has always been tightly integrated with military and intelligence operations. Many of its early leaders came from defense backgrounds. Its funding has long overlapped with classified aerospace programs and joint initiatives with the Department of Defense. What does that have to do with the Project Bluebeam? Satellite infrastructure. NASA helped establish the satellite network that now makes global broadcasting, GPS tracking, and real time surveillance as possible. The space based holograms Monash described wouldn't be possible without this groundwork. Atmospheric and ionospheric, no, and ionospheric, I don't think I'm saying that right. Ionospheric research. NASA has been involved in numerous atmospheric studies, including some that involve energy transmission and electromagnetic field manipulation. These are the same kinds of research programs often cited in the study of EMF based psychological influence. Psychological studies and simulation. NASA doesn't just study outer space, it has also invested heavily in simulated environments, behavioral conditioning, and performance psychology, including how people respond to confinement, sensory deprivation, and authoritative instruction. If you wanted to create a staged global event that felt scientifically real and was broadcast globally, NASA would be the perfect front end. They've got the hardware, the credibility, and the silence. The United Nations, the spiritual enforcer. If NASA provides the technology, the United Nations provides the ideology. The UN's stated mission is peace, global cooperation, and humanitarian order. But critics argue that behind its soft language branding is an effort to standardize human behavior politically, economically, and culturally under a centralized framework. UNEC, no, UNESCO, UNESCO, and global education. The UN has long been involved in shaping worldwide educational standards, including the development of global ethics, human rights doctrine, and curriculum that redefines spiritual values in secular context. New Age influence. Some of the UN's affiliated NGOs, advisory boards, and spiritual programs have openly promoted New Age philosophy, advocating for a global spirituality rooted in unity, cosmic consciousness, and planetary stewardship. To traditional faith communities, this reads less like peace and more like spiritual replacement. One world language. The UN has consistently pushed for common global languages, policies, and belief frameworks that reduce cultural differences in the name of harmony. The same framework that Monash warned would be used to unify religions under a false messiah. To the average person, the UN looks like a necessary institution, but in the context of Project Bluebeam, it becomes something else, the moral and spiritual enforcement mechanism behind the illusion. Coordination, not conspiracy. The modern world runs on networks, not secret societies. Project Bluebeam doesn't require a James Bond style villain twirling a mustache behind a control panel. It only requires tech technologists building tools without knowing the full purpose, institutions sharing resources for the greater good, governments agreeing on global standards in the name of safety, a cultural trained to trust the authority of those institutions. This is how real world influence operations work through infrastructure, bureaucracy, bureaucracy, policy, science, and language. During COVID 19, we watched science itself become politicized, shifting weekly, enforced by censorship, driven more by narrative control than open inquiry. People weren't just told what was true, they were told what they were allowed to question. That's all Bluebeam needs, not truth, but compliance, and above all, plausible deniability. You don't need the public to believe in a conspiracy. You only need them to believe what they're told when the event happens. The architects are already in place. NASA gives us the screen and the sky. The UN gives us the story we're told about. Media and tech platforms give us the emotional response. And AI, data, and neural tech gives us the personal connection. The parts don't need to be evil. They only need to be connected. When Serge Monast warned of a staged spiritual deception, he wasn't just talking about lights in the clouds. He was talking about the perfect storm of technological control and ideological soft power, a system that doesn't ask for your belief. It earns it, it feeds it, and eventually it owns it. In the next chapter, we'll examine the psychological side of this infrastructure, how culture, entertainment, and simulation have trained us to expect and accept the unreal as normal. Because the most dangerous part of Project Bluebeam may not be the moment it arrives, it may be the fact that when it does, we won't be surprised. Chapter 10, The Simulation Mindset, How We Accept the Unreal as Real. There's a reason Project Bluebeam feels more plausible now than it did in the 1990s. We've been conditioned to accept illusion as normal. Today, simulation isn't a trick, it's a lifestyle. From filters to AI art, from deep fakes to VR meditations, we've crossed a cultural threshold where the real no longer holds more value than the convincing. In fact, we often prefer the simulation. We curate our identities. We live stream our emotions. We consume media that blends fiction, faith, and futurism until we can't tell the difference. If the Messiah appeared in the sky tomorrow, most people wouldn't panic. They'd ask if it's being streamed on TikTok. Desensitized to the miraculous. Project Bluebeam relies on the power of spectacle, on the idea that humanity could be stunned into submission by a supernatural event. But the world we live in now, it's nearly impossible to shock. We've been saturated with CGI miracles in every blockbuster, virtual influencers with millions of real followers, AI generated people who speak like gurus and flirt like celebrities, hyper real VR experiences that recreate trauma, transcendence, and even death. In 2020, a Korean mother reunited with her deceased daughter via VR. She cried. The world cried with her. It was beautiful, but it was also synthetic. No one paused to question whether it was too real. When the line between the fake and faith blurs. So what happens when emotion becomes the metric for truth? We start believing based not on evidence, but on how something makes us feel. If an avatar inspires hope, it must be divine. If a voice in your head comforts you, it must be spiritual. If a digital experience brings peace, why question its origin? Bluebeam doesn't need to fake a god in the clouds anymore. It only needs to create a believable experience. And in a culture where truth is aesthetic, and meaning is emotional, experience beats evidence every time. Deep fake culture, trust instead. Unfortunately, we now live in a world where anything can be faked, anything can be denied, and anything emotionally resonant resonant is believed until it isn't useful anymore. Deep fake technology has created a kind of spiritual nihilism. People don't trust what they see, but they also don't care. The result? We no longer seek truth. We seek personal meaning and will accept it from any source that delivers. This makes us more vulnerable than ever, not to technology, but to those who control it. Simulated awe, real submission. Let's say Project Bluebeam unfolds tomorrow. The skies open. A holographic deity speaks in your language. You feel a presence deep in your body, whispering comfort and purpose. Everyone around you sees it too. Would you believe? More importantly, would you even care if it was real or not? Because in a post-truth world, it's not about what's real. It's about what feels real enough to submit to. That's the simulation mindset. It's the final layer of preparation before the launch of any system, religious, political, or psychological, that demands not just your obedience, but your faith. The next Messiah will be clickable. This isn't metaphor anymore. The belief systems of the future will be gamified, interpersonal, AI powered, emotionally addictive, delivered through your phone, your feed, or your neural link. The Messiah won't need to descend from the clouds. He'll show up in your notifications, and you'll accept him, not because you're weak, but because you've been made ready. In the next chapter, we'll confront where we are right now, the chaotic global atmosphere we're all feeling, the political confusion, spiritual decay, and cultural fractures. And we'll ask the question, is Project Bluebeam still coming, or has it already begun, just without the sky show? Chapter 11, already in motion, signs of the system without the spectacle. For decades, Project Bluebeam has been dismissed by mainstream thinkers as too theatrical to be real. A fake god in the sky, a voice in your head, a spiritual psyop to usher in a one world religion? Sure, they say. We'd know if that was happening. But what if that was the wrong expectation all along? What if Project Bluebeam doesn't require lasers in the clouds or alien above our cities? What if it's already here, not as an event, but as a system? What if the show doesn't happen on one day, but every day? Quiet conditioning through chaos. Look around. Do you see a world grounded in truth, faith, and rational consensus? Or do you see confusion, exhaustion, constant spiritual and cultural whiplash? Because this is what long term psychological operations look like. Confuse the population, destroy the old belief system, flood the void with noise, then offer stability, peace, and meaning at a cost. If you think of Bluebeam not as a single deceptive miracle, but as a multi decade transition into programmable belief, then suddenly the signs are everywhere. Faith is already being replaced. Ask yourself, who defines what's true today? Who decides which voices can speak? Who tells you what's safe to believe, question, or post? We've witnessed the replacement of a traditional religion with algorithmic morality, corporate ethics, and politicized science. Spiritual leaders have been replaced with influencers, prophets with podcasts, confessionals with social media feeds. Meanwhile, emotional messaging drives public action. Trust the science. We're all in this together. Silence is violence. Do the work. Stay safe. These aren't just slogans. They're modern mantras repeated in every medium designed to trigger conformity under the illusion of personal righteousness. That's not mass enlightenment. It's soft conditioning. The figure in the sky was never the point. Here's the trap. Focusing on whether or not they're going to be a giant hologram in the sky misses the entire strategy. You don't need to manufacture a visual miracle if the population is already spiritually starving, psychologically overwhelmed, addicted to digital validation, plugged into an ecosystem that tells them what to feel, fear, and follow. The goal of Bluebeam was never the illusion itself. The goal was to break belief and replace it with one that can be updated, moderated, and uploaded, like software. And if that's the case, we are living in phase 4 right now. The climate of crisis as the new normal. Monash warned of a moment when global systems would use chaos as the final push to enforce synthetic peace. That moment may not be in the future. It may be this exact cultural atmosphere. Religious institutions imploding from scandal or irrelevance. Political system polarizing to the point of madness. Economic models stretched to collapse. Cultural norms rewritten at algorithmic speed. Populations divided, anxious, desperate for meaning. This is the perfect environment for a savior to appear. Not one man, not one government, but a system. One that says, don't worry, we'll give you the truth. We'll give you peace. Just believe what we show you. And the people will say yes, not because they're weak, but because they're tired. If you're waiting for a sign, this is it. There may still come a day when the sky lights up with a spectacle. But what matters more is this. The tech is in place. The systems are coordinated. The population is conditioned. The belief gap is wide open. We may not need Project Bluebeam to begin because it already has. Only it didn't come with trumpets and clouds. It came with clicks, crisis, comfort, and compliance. And most people never saw it because they were busy looking up instead of looking within. Next, final chapter, resisting the faith algorithm. In the last chapter, we'll ask the most important question of all. Now that we've seen how belief can be broken, simulated, and sold, how do we protect it? How do we reclaim spiritual sovereignty in a world of illusion, manipulation, and emotional control? Because Project Bluebeam may be unstoppable at the system level, but at the individual level, you still have a choice. Chapter 12, resisting the faith algorithm, reclaiming inner authority in the age of simulation. If Project Bluebeam is a system, not just a spectacle, then its most powerful weapon isn't technology, it's surrender. It's the slow, seamless handing over of inner authority in exchange for comfort, security, and the illusion of clarity. In a world where reality is programmed, faith is synthetic, and control is dressed up as compassion. The greatest act of rebellion isn't fighting the system. It's refusing to believe what you're told without first confronting it within yourself. Reclaiming the source code of belief. At the core of Project Bluebeam is a question few are brave enough to ask. Who taught you what to believe? Was it your family, your culture, your education? Was it something deeper? Or was it just repetition? Because the belief is software. It's installed over time. And like any program, it can be hacked, rewritten, or overwritten, especially if the user never stops to ask, did I choose this? Or was it chosen for me? Resisting the faith algorithm doesn't mean rejecting all systems. It means examining them and only accepting what passes through your own discernment. That's what spiritual sovereignty means now. Slow down, get quiet, look deeper. The system thrives on speed, noise, reaction. The antidote isn't outrage, it's stillness. If belief is emotional software, then stillness is the debugging process. Slow down before you accept. Get quiet before you share. Look deeper before you trust. Because once your nervous system is hijacked through fear, urgency, or emotional overload, you're no longer believing, you're complying. And compliance feels a lot like faith when you're too tired to tell the difference. Remember what they're trying to replace. Project Bluebeam only works if something real is already in place, something worth simulating. That something is spiritual intuition, conscience, connection to truth that can't be transmitted through a screen. The system wants to offer a synthetic version, AI that soothes, media that aligns, narratives that comfort. But underneath that is a dangerous message. You don't need your own compass. We've uploaded one for you. Resisting that message doesn't require perfection, it just requires presence. Build faith that can't be faked. In a world of illusion, faith that cannot be manufactured becomes revolutionary. Build belief systems that don't depend on external validation, aren't detected or dictated by trending narratives, can't be simulated by tech or hijacked by fear. That kind of belief doesn't just resist Blue Beam, it makes it irrelevant. Because when your truth can't be outsourced, no hologram, algorithm, or world religion can take it from you. You are the firewall. Project Bluebeam may or may not arrive as Monas predicted. It may not need to, because if your mind is programmable, then your awareness is the firewall. You are the last line of defense between inner truth and external programming, spiritual intuition and synthetic belief, conscious discernment and passive consumption. You may not control the system, but you still control the terms of your surrender. And that's what makes you powerful. One final thought. We often imagine that a deception as grand as Project Bluebeam would arrive like a thunderclap, loud, overwhelming, undeniable. A glowing figure in the sky, a voice booming from the heavens, fire, spectacle, submission. But what if the plan didn't need that? What if the figure in the sky was just the final act, not the beginning? As you sit and read this book, look around. The world today is already unraveling. Politics are more divided and hostile than ever before. Nations don't trust each other. Citizens don't trust their governments. Information is no longer objective, it's a battlefield. Truth itself has become fractured, malleable, and sold in competing narratives. Religion, once a unifying force, is now politicized, commercialized, and weaponized. Faith is fading in the West, growing more extreme in other regions, and being challenged globally by a new creeping ideology, technological transcendence, the belief that AI, science, and universal consciousness can replace traditional gods. We are isolated yet connected, stimulated yet numb, flooded with data but starved for meaning. Global anxiety is at an all-time high, and with every new crisis, people cry out for solution, a savior, something or someone to make it all make sense. So maybe the deception isn't waiting above our heads. Maybe it's already working through our screens, our devices, our narratives, our fears. Maybe we've already entered the age of synthetic belief, not through one global event, but through 1,000 invisible cuts. The hologram may still come, but the mind control, the restructured beliefs, the manufactured consent, those may already be in place. And if that's true, the final phase of Project Bluebeam won't feel like an invasion. It will feel like a revelation we've been prepared to accept. If you're reading this, you've already part of the resistance, not to governments or satellites or holograms, but to the slow death of inner authority. Because in a world where everyone is waiting for the future in the sky to save or deceive them, the real miracle is this: you still have a choice. Don't look up. Don't look out. Look in. And I cannot believe I read that whole thing tonight. That is crazy. Did not know I could do that, honestly. But thank God it's done. And there was a lot in that, too. Just piecing this all together. I don't know why, honestly. Maybe it's because I'm not feeling well and I just don't know what to do with myself. I don't know. But anyway, it came to me to do a research and to search this out. And so I did. And I wanted to share that with you all. So until next time, keep your eyes on Jesus and your nose in the book, which is the Word of God. And let us embed the Word of God on the tablets of our hearts. so you and I will not sin against God or be deceived. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.